The meeting will now come to order. Welcome to the January 11th, 2021 meeting of the City of Raleigh Board of Adjustment. My name is Rodney Swink and I'm chair of the board. I'm joined today by John Kuntz, Donald Mile, Justin Sutton, Marvin Butler, Stephen Kinney, and Michael Rainey, fellow commissioners. The Board of Adjustment is a quasi-judicial body that is governed by the North Carolina General Statutes and the city's Unified Development Ordinance. We conduct evidentiary hearings on requests for variances, design adjustments, design alternates, and special use permits, among other requests. The Board of Adjustment assures that the due process rights of the parties are protected when hearing cases. Since today's meeting will be conducted remotely, in addition to the general quasi-judicial rules, today's hearings will be conducted in accordance with state statutes that allow for remote quasi-judicial evidentiary hearings during the current COVID-19 states of emergency. All presentations, documents, exhibits, or other materials that will be submitted at today's evidentiary hearings were posted online in board docs prior to this meeting. These materials can be viewed at any time during today's meeting by visiting www.raleighNC.gov/board-adjustment and clicking the link to view the agenda. If at any time a participant has issues with the technology, please send a message to the moderator. Chat function has been disabled for this meeting for all participants and the board members, except for the ability to message the moderator if you have technical difficulties. Before we begin the evidentiary hearings on today's agenda, I ask our attorney to briefly explain for the participants how we will be conducting today's evidentiary hearings.
My name is Janie Richardson, and I will be the attorney for the Raleigh Board of Adjustment today and over the next few months while Catherine Hill is out on maternity leave. Today's evidentiary hearings will proceed very similar to a regular meeting with a few minor adjustments. First, all witnesses must be sworn in. Because of the remote format, individuals who signed up to speak, as well as city staff participants, have already signed a written oath form, which will be reaffirmed on the record as they testify today. The participants have also already provided written consent to today's remote meeting. We will begin with staff presentation and report from a member of the planning department. As a reminder, the standards that the applicant must meet for approval are in the UDO. They are also set forth in the staff report and the applicant's application. The standard will be discussed by staff and the applicant throughout the hearing. The burden is on the applicant to provide competent material and substantial evidence as to each of the required standards to be granted the request. Following staff's presentation, the applicant will be acknowledged to present their case and witnesses. The board will acknowledge the attorney or applicant for each case first as the point person for the applicant. Following the applicant, any opponents will be given an opportunity to speak. The applicant then has the opportunity for any rebuttal and/or closing statement. When all testimony is complete, we will close the evidentiary hearing and board members will then deliberate and vote on each case. Following the meeting, the board's decision will be prepared with written findings of fact and conclusions of law. The decision will be incorporated into today's meeting minutes and will be adopted at the same time as the meeting minutes are adopted.
Okay, thank you. We will now conduct the evidentiary hearings on today's agenda. As our attorney stated, the standard the applicant must meet to be granted their request is set forth in the UDO, and the board's decisions must be based upon competent, material, and substantial evidence related to this applicable standard. In the interest of efficiency, if you will be speaking in a hearing today, please focus your testimony and arguments on the applicable standard, not personal preferences or opinion. Witnesses may testify as to facts to which they are competent to testify, so long as those facts relate to the legal standards. In addition, lay or non-expert witness testimony is limited to facts, not opinions. Focusing your testimony and arguments on the applicable facts and standards will allow the board to hear cases in an efficient and timely manner. So let's move now to the evidentiary hearing number one.
Rodney, do we want to go ahead and designate who will be sitting in for Ms. Russo?
Okay. See, Ralph, who would that be for me? Is that Michael Rainey? Michael, we'll put you on this first case, please. You confirm that? Michael, are you muted?
You can
Okay.
hear Mr.
Sorry,
Rainham,
sorry,
Mr.
guys. I
Kelly.
was trying to find the unmute button. I confirmed that.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that, Michael. Thank you, Janie. I appreciate you pointing that out. Okay, our first case is 2204 Oxford Hills Drive. Wendy Kelly is the property owner. It's a variance case, BOA-0002-2020. We'll start by swearing in our staff. Keegan McDonald, with the planning staff case presenter. Keegan, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Justin Rometta, the zoning administrator. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, thank you. Now, as for participants, when I call your name, please state your name again for the record and your address, and then I will reaffirm your oath. Wendy Kelly is the applicant.
Wendy Kelly,
And your address?
2204 Oxford Hills Drive.
Okay, Ms. Kelly, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Matthew Carpenter,
Yes.
your address, please.
Matthew Carpenter, 127 West Hargett Street, Suite 500.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, let's see, Mr. McDonald, you're up. Welcome.
Thank you. So I'll begin by just reading the nature of request for this case. Whereas Wendy Kelly, property owner, requests a 12-foot variance and a 5-foot variance to the encroachment allowances set forth in section 154D1I and 223 of the Unified Development Ordinance to construct an unenclosed deck that encroaches 20 feet into the rear yard and is 0 feet from the rear property line in conjunction with the townhouse on a 0.11 acre property zoned R10 and located at 2204 Oxford Hills Drive. So here is the subject property. This particular property is part of an older townhouse development that's somewhat unusual in its development. The home here shares a party wall with the property to the north. However, the orientation of the home would lead you to believe that is the rear yard, but for purposes of the UDO, it is actually considered a side yard, just for your reference when we get into the actual property survey. So this home was constructed in 1986. There was a recombination of the plat that occurred in 1987, which moved the property line, creating kind of this jut out that you see instead of a more uniform property line on the northwest side. And what's being requested is for an extension of the existing patio, existing deck. And here is the plan that was submitted, and I'll go to the next slide because I think this gives you a better idea. So as you can see from the plan, and particularly the inset, there is an existing deck on the property that they're looking to expand. And as you may note in the request language, we have worded it such that it's providing complete relief from what would otherwise be allowed as an encroachment, just given how close the deck will ultimately be to all of the adjoining property lines. The applicant has requested complete relief just to ensure once built that there's no issue, but they do anticipate that there will be a little bit of space once completed. So the property line in question is to the rear, and it's shown, give me one moment, I can annotate for you, but The property line really in question is here. So the other two property lines here and here are actually considered side property lines. And because townhouse units can be built up to the side property line, all that's of concern with the code is this rear property line, I think shown here as L6. So they're looking to expand the deck, and again are requesting complete relief, but anticipate potentially a little bit of space between the ultimate extension of the deck and that property line. So now I'm going to just speak to the hardship criteria as presented by the applicant. To the first criteria, that unnecessary hardship would result from strict application of the ordinance. Just want to note that the applicant has an existing deck on their property, and while the UDO does allow for certain setback encroachments, there's no provision or guarantee that all property owners be able to construct a deck of their desired dimensions. To criteria number 2, that the hardship results from conditions that are peculiar to the property. We'll note that all townhouses within the surrounding R10 district must adhere to the required 20-foot rear yard setback, and then the specified encroachment allowances, which will essentially allow you to be as close as 12 feet from the rear property line. So this is something that, adjoining neighbors would have to comply with as well. To point number 3, that the hardship does not result from actions taken by the applicant or the property owner. Just noting that there is a choice here to expand the existing deck, which is triggering compliance with these setback encroachment allowances. And lastly, that the requested variance is consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of the ordinance. Staff just notes that encroaching further into the rear yard setback could impact the spirit, purpose, and intent of these regulations. So that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to try and answer any questions you may have, and if not, I can turn it over to the applicant.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McDonald. Board members, do you have any questions? Okay, hearing none, we'll move to the applicant. The applicant will now present evidence and legal arguments in support of the request. As a reminder to the applicant, any evidence and argument must focus on the applicable standards. I also remind you that your application and exhibits were provided ahead of the meeting and in board docs, and I would ask you to formally admit them into the record as appropriate. So Wendy Kelly, you're on.
Matthew Carpenter, attorney at Maddox Law Firm, here on behalf of the property owner, Wendy Kelly. I'd like to make a motion to move all of our exhibits into the record.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wendy is also on the call with me this afternoon. Can we get our exhibits up there, Keegan? Thanks. Ms. Kelly is requesting a variance from the rear setback requirement to allow the extension of an existing uncovered deck. And as Keegan mentioned, our request is expressed as a variance from the encroachment allowances, specifically a 12-foot variance and a 5-foot variance to the encroachment allowances in section 1.5.4 D1I. So to give you some background on this case, we originally filed this request almost a year ago, and the original plan showed the new deck steps extending outside of the sidewall of the home. Can we go to our exhibit 4? Thanks. So the original plan showed the steps, as you can see, jutting out towards the side property line. And so Ms. Kelly spoke to the adjacent neighbor who requested that the steps be moved within the side wall profile of the home. And so Ms. Kelly sought to have the plans redrawn, but then it was right around March or April of last year. And then, as we know, COVID hit and things got delayed even further. And so once the initial shock of COVID kind of settled down, Ms. Kelly had the plans redrawn, as you can see here, to show the steps within that side wall. So if we move to exhibit 3 now. Thanks. So just to clarify something Keegan said about the, all the townhomes having to comply with the setback requirement. As you can see on this plat here, the property is part of a townhome development known as Oxford Park, which was built in the early 1980s. And accordingly, the homes were built well before the implementation of the current 20-foot rear setback. And as you can see on the plat, many of these townhomes were built and are currently in the rear setback and the side setbacks. And so Ms. Kelly's home is no different. The home and the existing deck are located within the rear setback. And can we go back to exhibit 4? Thanks. And so note that, as Keegan mentioned, this is an unusually shaped lot. And so staff has identified the small slanted lot as the rear property line. And so that is the property line in question with this request. So moving on to the variance standards, first, unnecessary hardship would result from the strict application of the setback requirement. Strict application of the rear setback requirement here would prevent the best use of the rear of the property during a time when access to outdoor living space is critical. And second, the hardships here result from conditions that are peculiar to this property. First, the built condition of the house is an issue because the home was built before the current setback requirements. And so the house and the existing deck are already within the rear setback. And so because of the built condition of the home, there's no other practical location for outdoor living space. And we also here have a really irregular lot shape. The lot is located on a curve along Oxford Hills Drive, which creates where the rear lot line is not parallel with the back of the house. And so that's contributing to our setback issue. And third, the hardships did not result from the actions of the owner. Ms. Kelly purchased the property with the current built location, current built condition, and the existing deck located in the rear setback. So, fourth, the request is consistent with the spirit and purpose and intent of the ordinance. As I mentioned, Ms. Kelly has worked with the adjacent neighbor and agreed to build the new deck steps within the side lot line to try to, mitigate any negative effects that may be caused by the deck. And the request will allow Ms. Kelly to better utilize her outdoor living space. The proposed deck will not be any closer to either of the side property lines than the current deck. And, lastly, the plans have been approved by the Oxford Park HOA. And so to conclude, the variance is necessary because of the irregular lot shape and the existing built condition of the home and the deck. Ms. Kelly's worked with the adjacent neighbor to mitigate their concerns, and the new deck will not be any closer to the side property lines than the current deck. So that concludes what I have. I and Ms. Kelly are available for any questions the board may have.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Mr. Carpenter. First, I apologize. I did not realize you were the representing attorney. My notes indicated otherwise, so I apologize for that.
That's
But
okay.
thank you for the presentation. Do you have any board questions for Mr. Carpenter or Ms. Kelly? Okay, hearing none, we had no one else signed up to speak either in support or opposition. So we can move to the final section. We've had no board questions. Anything further from the applicant? I think you've summed it up, but anything else you would add for us?
I think that's it for now.
Mr. McDonald, anything else from you?
Not at this time, thanks.
Okay, then let us officially close the evidentiary hearing and move to our board deliberations. This is a variance case. I'll entertain commentary or a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve. John Coons.
Thank you, Mr. Coontz. We have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Is it Mr. Miles? Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? And let's go to a roll call vote, and Mr. Rainey is our alternate in this case. Ralph, you're muted. Ralph, you're muted.
We try again. Oh, I muted myself before. Sorry about that. Didn't realize I muted myself. Okay. Roll call. Mr. Coons?
Approve.
Thank you. Mr. Mile?
Approve.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton.
Approve.
Thank you, Mr. Who am I missing here?
Rainey,
Mr. Rainey,
Approve.
and I'm going nuts here. Mr. Sutton.
nope, it's Swink.
I'm
We
sorry.
got Sutton. You skipped Swink.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. my fault. Sorry, sir. Thank
No
you.
worries. I approve.
Thank you. So
Thank you very
that's
much.
5. Thank you.
Thank you so much, folks. Thanks for coming in. Let's move on to evidentiary hearing number 2. In this case, Mr. Kenny, if you would be the alternate, please. This is 3663 Durwood Lane. Phyllis and Alonzo Terzella, property owners. This is variance case BOA 0062-2020. Our staff witnesses have already been sworn in. So let me move to the participants. When I call your name, please state your name for the record as well as your address, and I will reaffirm your oath. Phyllis Terzella, and if I mispronounce your name, please correct it. Phyllis Terzella,
That's correct. I'm here.
your
Phyllis-
address.
Phyllis Terzella, 3663 Durwood Lane, Raleigh.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Alfonso Terzella.
Alfonso Terzella, 3663 Durwood Lane, Raleigh.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Mr. McDonald.
Thank you. So this is a request for an 8.7 foot and 1.4 foot variance to the encroachment allowances set forth in sections 154D1I and 223 of the Unified Development Ordinance in order to construct an unenclosed patio that encroaches 16.7 feet into the rear yard setback and is 3.6 feet from the rear property line, in conjunction with the townhouse on a 0.042 acre property zoned R10 CU and located at 3663 Durwood Lane. So here you can see from the aerial, this is a small townhouse community that was recently built in 2019, I believe, a collection of 6 townhouses. They directly abut a common area to the rear, which is used as a stormwater access and drainage easement. And the particular request is to expand a patio, so very similar to the request you just heard. In this instance, it's a level patio, not a deck, but it still falls under the same encroachment allowances. So this image, I apologize if it's showing up blurry, but probably the best I can do showing the extension of the patio. So it'll be extended both laterally and towards the rear. Again, because this is a townhouse, there are no encroachment restrictions related to the side yard because the townhouse can be built, and in this case is built at the side property line. Instead, what we're concerned with here is its proximity to the rear property line and how far it can encroach there into the allowed setback, or required setback, excuse me. So they're looking to extend this patio. It will maintain 3.6 feet of distance between the edge of the patio and the rear property line. There's some additional images that I think may be helpful. Here's just an aerial image showing, provided by the applicant, showing the general shape and dimensions of the patio itself. And this image, which is basically if you were to look at the patio standing on the ground from the rear yard, at the bottom, you can see a retaining wall, which they're proposing, and then some guard railing at the edge. And basically, this would be the edge of the patio as it looks from what would be the common area to the rear. So I will note that the applicants have sought and received a stormwater design exception for this retaining wall because of its proximity to the property line as well. And so that piece has already been approved. Again, that's a separate administrative process, but I did want to make you all aware. And here are some images showing the rear yard. So you can see the extent of the existing patio and how they would look to extend it outwards. As I understand it, part of their intention is to both expand the usable area and also to create a more level surface to the rear, which would prevent a drop off that exists now with a new retaining wall and guard railing. And here's another image just to show the difference in grade that's present. And so I did just want to touch on the hardship criteria, just the number 1 and number 2. The first being that unnecessary hardship would result from strict application of the ordinance. Wanting to note that the applicant has an existing unenclosed patio that conforms with the encroachment allowances. And similarly, there's no UDO provision that guarantees all property owners to be able to construct a patio of their desired dimensions. And to hardship criteria number 2, while there may be an existing slope that is creating a potentially dangerous condition, the applicants could construct guardrails or some other type of barrier along the existing patio to prevent an accident or fall. So that concludes my commentary. I'm happy to answer any questions. If not, I can pass it over to the applicants.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Any questions from the board for Mr. McDonald? Okay, the applicant will now present evidence and legal arguments in support of the request. As a reminder to you, any evidence and argument must focus on the applicable standards. So we have Phyllis and Alfonso Terzella. You may proceed with your presentation.
Yes, my presentation is not going to be quite as elaborate as the previous ones, being a layperson. But our primary reason for this was for our safety. We are senior citizens. And at the back of the existing patio is approximately 12 inches before that steep drop-off occurs. I have gone out there occasionally and, I fortunately caught my balance, but I am concerned of losing my balance. And I do see this as a severe safety hazard, especially if the patio area contains a few more people. Right now, it juts out 8 feet from the edge of the townhouse, with the width of it being 12 feet. But that's a pretty small area, and I'm concerned about if we have multiple people on the patio, the occurrence of someone falling and getting hurt. So it's more a safety thing than anything else. I would also like to have a little more room out the back, just to make better use of the property that we purchased. That's really all I have to say. The safety is the biggest thing. We wanted to comply with the ordinance. We originally just put in for a building permit on it, and we were directed to keep Mr. McDonald that we had to move forward with a variance. So we do want to make sure that we want to be sure that safety is assured and that we are in compliance with the local laws and ordinances.
Right, and this is Phyllis Terzella. I also am concerned with my safety. I do have a problem with my balance, and if I go near the edge of the back of the patio, I haven't fallen down the hill, but it's come close, and so we wanted to try to make it so that we could use the back area of our property and not worry about our safety. We also have been approved by our HOA for this not the variance, but for the patio. And I guess you said we have to request to move all the exhibits into record, so you can do that. I can't think of anything
No,
else really.
that's
We
it.
just want to be able to use our back patio when the weather is nicer, and right now it's a concern.
Okay. Well, thank you, and thank you for requesting that your records be submitted. I was going to remind you to do that, and you got to it ahead of me. Good for you. Do we have any board questions for the Trezellas? We have no one else who has signed up to speak in opposition or in support of this, so we can move to our closing statements, if any. Board, last chance for questions. Mr. and Ms. Trezella, anything further from you?
Just that we have spoken to all our neighbors, both next to us and all along the 6 townhouses, and also people across the street. And just to note that the back where we have the back of the patio is facing the common area, and then beyond the common area is protected environmental lands. So there's nothing else that's going to be constructed in that area at all.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McDonald, anything further from you?
Not at this time.
Thank you. We'll close the evidentiary hearing and move to the board deliberations. I see Ms. Rudisill has joined us, but we've already requested that Mr. Kinney hear this case. So Kathy will hold you for the next one. I'll entertain commentary or a motion.
I make a motion to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Mile. We have a motion to approve. May I have a second, please?
Second, John Coons.
Thank you, Mr. Coontz. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Let's move to a roll call vote then. Mr. Puccini?
It seems my space bar isn't working too well. Okay, thank you. Okay. Mr. Mile?
Approve.
Mr. Coontz?
Approve.
Chairman Swink?
Approve.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton.
Approved.
Thank you, Mr. Kenny.
Approve.
Thank you. Can you guys understand me because of my mask? Just want to make sure.
Yes.
Thank you. That makes
Okay.
5.
Thank you very much. Thank you, folks. Let's move on to evidentiary hearing number 3. This is 4800 Durley Road, Hanson Aggregates Southeast LLC, the property owner. This is a variance, BOA 0069-2020. Our staff has been sworn in. I'll call the participants. When I call your name, please state your name for the record and your address, and I will reaffirm your oath. Let's see, Caitlin Shelby.
Yes, Caitlin Shelby, 1414 Raleigh Road, Suite 429, Chapel Hill, North Carolina.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. John Callahan.
John Callahan, 333 Wade Avenue, Raleigh, 27605.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. James Guyton.
James Guyton, 2233 Chesterfield Avenue, Charlotte, North Carolina.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. And Caitlin Shields.
Caitlin Shields, 333 Wade Avenue, Raleigh, NC 27605.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. McDonald, welcome back.
Thank you. So I will begin again just by reading the nature of request. And actually, before I do, I did want to note that the applicant has chosen to withdraw 2 of the variance requests contained within the overall nature of request. Those are numbers 3 and 4 as denoted in the legal advertisement. So they are withdrawing both of those requests pursuant to some recent conversations that they're no longer needed. So I just wanted to make that known to the board. That being said, I'll begin my readout. So first is a variance for complete relief from the 2-foot minimum ground floor elevation requirement set forth in section 323G1 of the Unified Development Ordinance for all proposed townhouse buildings. 2 is a variance for complete relief from that same ground floor elevation requirement set forth in 324F1 for all proposed apartment buildings. Next is variance from the 70% minimum building width in the primary street build 2 set forth in UDO section 323E2 for all proposed townhouse buildings on the south side of the proposed neighborhood street to allow for a 45% minimum building width in the primary street build 2. And a variance from the 70% building width in the primary street build 2 set forth in UDO section 323E2 for all proposed townhouse buildings on the east side of the proposed neighborhood local to allow for a 60% minimum building width in the primary street build 2 in order to construct 63 townhouse units and 304 apartment units on a 28.49 acre property zoned RX5CU and located at 4800 Durley Road. So here is the subject property. It's currently an undeveloped parcel abutting Durley Road. It's also adjacent to some single family residences to the south and also to the east. The property recently underwent a rezoning, so the current zoning is RX5CU. The proposal includes both townhouse and apartment units. The property, what's necessitating the variances really related to both minimum ground floor elevation and also build 2 is some of the natural and proposed site elements and some natural site constraints. So there will be primary tree conservation area along the front of the property or development along Durley Road, and also neighborhood transition zones to the south shown here. And as you can see, there is a plan to locate multiple apartment buildings more towards the center of the site, and then on the outer portions of the site will be townhouses. The biggest site constraint that the applicant is dealing with is significant topographic changes throughout the property. And if I can proceed to the next slide, this will give you a better indication. So there's significant drop off throughout the site, in some spaces equating to about 130 feet of relief. So there's already going to be extensive grading that will be done on the site. But this has created unique challenges which necessitate relief from the minimum ground floor elevation requirement, and also precludes the applicant from locating townhouses along more of the street width in 2 locations. So those 2 locations, as you may be able to note from the image above, are the street kind of highlighted in blue, which I'll circle here. So this is one area that they are seeking relief from the minimum build 2 width requirement. And what that really means is just that for 70% of that street segment, in terms of feet, a building has to be located within the build to for whatever that 70% marker is. And so they are close, but not quite meeting that requirement at 68%. And then similarly, an issue occurring along this street here, where there's also a 70% requirement, and currently, or as proposed, they plan to have 54%. So these are the two primary issues related to build to. And again, they are also seeking complete relief from the minimum ground floor elevation requirement due to the topographic changes over the site. That really concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I know the applicants have a pretty detailed presentation and can probably go into a little bit more technical detail for you all, but happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McDonald. Board members, you have any questions? Okay, hearing none, the applicant will now present evidence and legal arguments in support of the request. As a reminder, any evidence and argument must focus on the applicable standards. Mr. Marsh, I believe you're up.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the board. I am Collier Marsh at 301 Fayetteville Street in Raleigh. I'm with Parker Poe and the land use attorney on behalf of the applicant. I'd like to start by asking that our application, the presentation, case report, and supporting materials all be accepted into the record.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and so here we have the site on the screen outlined in red. The site is 4800 Durley Road. I'll note that in the application, we've listed acreage as 28 acres. That's the acreage from IMAPS. Our surveyed acreage is just slightly lower, 26.39 acres. Wanted to make sure that was clear for the record. By way of background, in October of 2020, this property was rezoned in case Z4719 to an RX5 CU district. And that included a condition that limited building types to townhomes and apartment building types. The goal with this project is to construct 63 townhouse building units and 304 apartment building units. If you could turn to the next slide. So this request is now for 4 total variances grouped in 2 categories. As Keegan noted, a bit of late breaking development after some discussions that continued into this morning. We were able to remove 2 of the variance requests that were initially considered or included in this application. Those are in the middle of your screen under the header primary street build to maximum 55 feet. So those requests labeled 3 and 4 have been withdrawn as they are not necessary. We haven't updated, we did not have an opportunity to update our PowerPoint, so I'll just make sure in any instance where we're referring to those withdrawn requests, just that it's clear for the record that they're no longer needed. So out of the 4 remaining requests, the first 2 requests will seek relief from the 2-foot minimum ground floor elevation requirements. The only difference between those 2 requests are the building types. One applies to townhouse buildings and one applies to apartment buildings. Moving down to the bottom category, the last 2 requests, last 2 variances we've included seek relief from the 70% minimum building widths in the primary street build to. The difference between the 2 is specific to the internal streets that we're proposing in our site plans. The first seeks a 25% variance for townhouse building types on the south side of a proposed neighborhood street. And that would result in a minimum building width in the build to of 45%. The second request seeks a 10% variance for townhouse building types on the east side of a proposed neighborhood local, which would result in a minimum building width in the primary street build to of 60%. As we'll show through our witness testimony, the main driver behind these requests will be site topography. The site slopes approximately 130 feet across the entire site. So that will be the main driver. And we'll also establish that our remaining 4 variances are justified under the UDO standards. We're presenting evidence on each. If you could please turn to the next slide. So starting with that first category of variances and the first two variance requests, which seek relief from the 2-foot minimum ground floor elevation requirements of UDO 3.2.3 G1 for townhouse building types and 3.2.3 F1 for apartment building types. To walk through these requests, I'd like to call John Callahan. And John, if you could state your name, your address, your education and experience for the board.
All right, good afternoon. This is John Callahan, 333 Wade Avenue in Raleigh. I am the president of John A. Edwards and Company, licensed PE with approximately 27 years of experience for this type work, and I am the design engineer of record for the project.
And at this time, I'd like to tender John as an expert in civil engineering and site design. Okay, so John, have you reviewed the proposed site plan for its compliance with the requirements of the requested variances?
Yes, my firm has designed the plans and I have reviewed them.
And can you please explain the site features and reasoning behind these first two ground floor elevation requests?
Certainly. As you can see on the slide here in front of you, there is approximately 130 feet of vertical relief across the property. Any proposed development would attempt to balance the cut and fill as close as possible while following the general lay of the land. It just makes sense when developing property like this. And making a site just a flat pancake is just not practical, especially with this kind of topo across it. In accordance with the UDO, the 2-foot minimum ground floor elevation will be measured from the average grade of the internal adjacent streets, and whether they're public or private. These streets, in order to design this property, these streets have to follow the general lay of the land, and they will have slopes on them. And with the buildings positioned along the slope roads, meeting these requirements ends up with a couple complications of excessive fill on the low side of each building, and as well as some ADA access problems. If you'll turn to the next slide, please. This is just a very generic illustration, but it is somewhat to scale of a slope street and the approximate length of an apartment or a townhome building. And as you can see here, as you set the building 2 foot above at the average grade in front of the street, you end up with quite a bit of fill on the low end. And so that's just, like I said, a representation illustration here. If you could turn to the next slide, please. All right, and this is the site plan that we are working on. And as you can see, we have designed this layout to work as close as possible with the lay of the land, minimizing walls and slope heights as much as possible. As required by the code and meeting the build to. You can also see the buildings are placed up close to the adjacent roads. The cul-de-sac and the street there that's outlined in blue, those are the public streets that would be internal to the property, and we have to meet build to in those areas. And just placing the buildings up close to the building makes that very difficult. To be 2 foot above those grades, as those roads will be required to be sloped with the general lay of the land, similar to the illustration that I just showed you. I don't think we need to address Alon Durley. That was part of the.
Sure. Thanks, John. I'll just note that the header on this slide also represents variances from the 55-foot primary street build-to request, and that portion can be disregarded as those two requests were withdrawn. If you could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so turning to the building width and primary street build-to requests, the first of those two requests is for a 25% variance from the 70% minimum building width and primary street build to required under UDO 3.2.3.E.2 for all townhouse building types. And that this is specifically related to the townhouse buildings located on the south side of our proposed neighborhood street. So looking at this image, this is shown in the green highlight, and the orange line represents the street frontage for the townhouse building types on the south side of the neighborhood street. So John, could you please explain to the board why this variance is required?
Yes, thank you. The subdivision plan, I just would like to note that the subdivision plan for this project has already been submitted and is under review by staff. With the uses that are shown here on townhome and apartment, it has already been determined that the interior streets will serve as the primary street when adjacent to a townhome use, and they are considered a side street when adjacent to the apartment use. So really, that's why the 70% requirement along the primary street only applies to the townhome side of the street. In this diagram here, you see the street in question is highlighted in green. The build-to frontage is the orange line, and as you look at as the road approaches Raleigh, you see we do have an absence of buildings in that location. The reason for this is the steep grade coming in off of Raleigh Road. That section of the street will have a steeper grade, and also we've got tree conservation. It's not highlighted, but you can see there is a hatched area up close to Raleigh there that is required as part of the subdivision. So that's another area that would be impossible to place buildings in this along that section. Additionally, these townhomes will have driveways, so we do want to also separate those townhome driveways from the entrance intersection as much as possible to avoid any conflicts with stacked cars at the intersection. So by pushing these buildings away from Raleigh Road, that's what's creating the issue in not being able to meet the 70% requirement.
Thank you, John. If we could turn to the next slide. Okay, and this is the final variance request. This request seeks a 10% variance from the 70% minimum building width and primary street build to required by UDO 3.2.3.E.2 for all townhouse building types on the east side of the proposed neighborhood local. Looking at this slide on your screen, this is shown in the purple highlight, the neighborhood local, and then the orange line represents the street frontage for the townhouses that are subject to this variance request. John, can you please explain to the board why this variance is needed?
Sure. Yeah, much like the previous request, the site's topography influenced the site layout for these townhome buildings along the east side of the neighborhood local street. Following the natural lay of the land and the contours requires us to leave space between the buildings so that we can make up grade change between the buildings because we can't provide but so much step in the buildings themselves as they go from along the slope of the road. In addition, you can see the termination point of the purple highlighted street terminates in a cul-de-sac. And that was requirement because of this is the end of a public street, and then so we had to have a turnaround for emergency vehicles before it went into private driveways. And again, placing buildings around a cul-de-sac, the arc nature of the circle there makes that a little difficult. I also like to point out, if you can see, there's a cyan or light blue colored highlight there heading straight up from the cul-de-sac to the neighboring property. That is an access point that was required by zoning conditions. So we could not put a building in that location. So it creates a little bit extra space there. And we are very close to meeting the 70% requirement, but not quite making it.
Thanks, John. I'd like to quickly summarize the evidence for these variance requests, and then we can make our witnesses available to the board for questions. If you could turn to the next slide. So the first two requests, which sought relief from the minimum ground floor elevation requirements, the 2-foot requirements, do meet each of the variance findings. First, with unnecessary hardship. The unnecessary hardship would result here because compliance would require substantial grading and fill. It would require raising of the proposed buildings to meet street elevations on streets that are sloping pretty substantially. Substantial building modifications would also be required, including intricate ramps to provide ADA access. And then finally, all of these modifications to the site would result in substantial disturbance to the site's natural buffers. The hardship results from conditions peculiar to the property. Here, these requests are driven by the site's topography. As we mentioned, the slope is significant with total changes in excess of 130 feet, also moving in a couple of different directions as shown on those earlier slides. The hardship did not result from actions taken by the applicant. The site sloping topography pre-existed applicant's ownership and certainly is not caused by the applicant themselves. Last, the requested variance is consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of the ordinance. We're consistent here because relief from the ground floor elevation requirements would prevent unnecessary site disturbance and unnecessary fill and grading. It will also enable the construction of buildings that are more easily accessed from walkways and parking areas, and to make sure that those areas are in close proximity to the buildings. This will also simplify ADA access to the buildings. If you could go to the next slide, please. And so this is our final slide. Again, to clarify for the board, this slide references 2 requests that have been withdrawn. Those requests sought relief along Durley Road, which is no longer required. So what's remaining are the requests that seek relief from the building width and the primary street build to those last 2 requests we talked about. And those 2 requests do meet each of the variance findings. Again, unnecessary hardship because compliance would require significant site modification, disturbance of the site's natural buffers. Strict compliance would require the landowner to disturb steep slopes, result in substantial grading and fill, and substantial retaining walls. And substantial compliance with the ordinance would require disturbance of the proposed tree conservation areas as well. Like the previous request, the hardship results from conditions that are peculiar to the property. This is again driven by the site's topography as well as the location of proposed tree conservation areas. Hardship did not result from actions taken by the applicant. This is topo driven and driven by the tree conservation areas. Finally, the request is consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of the ordinance, and that is because relief from the build-to requirements will prevent unnecessary site disturbance. It will allow the landowner to preserve natural buffers on the site, and it will allow the construction of buildings that are more appropriately located within the site and more safely accessed. That concludes our presentation. We have several other folks from the team available if the board has any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Board members, any questions for Mr. Marsh or his team? Okay, hearing none, there are no one else who signed up to speak either in support or opposition. So we'll move to our final section. Mr. McDonald, anything further from you?
Not at this time.
Okay, Mr. Marsh, anything further from you?
Nothing further, thank you.
Okay, let's close the evidentiary hearing then and move to our board deliberations. This is a variance. I'll entertain commentary or a motion.
John Coates, it's a tough site. I can't remember a site we've had this much topo to deal with, and I actually thought the variance requests would be greater than they are. So I think they've done a pretty remarkable job at complying to the best of any good developer probably would do. I'm inclined to make a motion to approve.
Okay, I'll accept that as a motion to approve. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Ms. Rudisill, thank you very much. Any further discussion? I would also say this is a tough site, 130 feet change in elevation and next to Crabtree Creek. Any cut and fill would make me a little nervous at this point. So the idea of trying to minimize that, which this appears to do, is at least a better approach. So certainly appreciate that effort. So I have a motion to approve and a second. Any further discussion? Let's move to a roll call vote, please, Mr. Puccini.
Thank you. Mr. Coons?
Approve.
Thank you, Ms. Rudisil.
Approved.
Thank you, Chairman Swink.
Approved.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton.
Approved.
Thank you. And who did I miss? Mr. Mile.
Approved.
Thank you. That makes 5.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the case. Let's move along to our evidentiary hearing number 4. This is 121198 Parton Road, 901, 1001, 1005, and 1009 Freedom Drive, 4524, 4702, 4704, and 4710 New Bern Avenue. Freedom Industrial Park LLC is the property owner. This is a variance 0071-2020. As for our participants, when I call your name, please state your name for the record as well as your address, and I will reaffirm your oath. We'll begin with Justin Parker.
Good afternoon. Justin Parker, 4509 Creedmoor Road, Suite 201, Raleigh, North Carolina, 27612.
Mr. Parker, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. And Corey Howell.
Yes, good afternoon. Corey Howell with Kimley Horn, 421 Fayetteville Street, Suite 600, Raleigh, North Carolina, 27601.
Mr. Puccini, were you able to hear that okay? Okay, thank you. Okay, Mr. Howell, your voice was a little soft there. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, or nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McDonald.
Yes, so this is a request for a variance for complete relief from the loading dock location requirements set forth in 719B1 of the Unified Development Ordinance to locate loading docks at the front of the building in order to construct one general building totaling 129,250 square feet for warehouse and distribution and light industrial uses on a 27.96 acre property zoned IX3 and IX3CU and located on currently multiple properties along Parton Road, Freedom Drive, and New Bern Avenue. So here's the collection of properties, and I'll jump quickly to the actual site plan. So as you can see, there's a proposed building on the site with a large amount of parking. And what's at question really is the loading dock and the location therein. They are choosing to locate the loading dock here, which relevant to the new street that will be constructed as part of this development is the front of the building. The code is very strict in this regard that it be located to the side or rear. I will note that there will be screening with a C2 street yard along that new roadway extension. Also C3 street yards in the corners and a solid roll gate to provide additional cover, security, and screening from the loading dock areas. So that is really the request. As I understand it, there are internal operational constraints that make it so the loading areas as they're proposed are in the most ideal location. And as you can see, the applicant has done their best to screen and adequately cover this loading dock area from public view, and of course from any other persons or members of the public accessing it in any way. That really concludes my presentation. I'm happy to try and answer any questions, and if not, I can pass it off to the applicant.
Mr. Chairman, you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you, Ralph.
Thank you. Thank you. I apologize. I was asking board members first if there were any questions.
Is the intent of the ordinance here an appearance issue? That we want to make certain that it's not creating an unsightly condition? And Keegan, you may not know the answer to this, but that would seem to me to be the concern. If there's screening, et cetera, making the area so it's not really visible to the general public.
Yeah, I think there is an aesthetic concern. Also, these requirements are written in a very general way, such that they don't necessarily account for a property of this scale or this exact site where you have such a large property in a very industrial part of town, such that buildings even in downtown where all street frontages could be potentially active are held to this standard. And I think the intent is just to concentrate some of this activity away from the front of the building where there will be more pedestrian activity potentially. And obviously that's not something that's as large of a concern here at this particular site, just given its nature and the size and proposed operation.
Other questions? Okay, I did have one, as I said, as I was saying to myself earlier, this is not case related, but curiosity. What are the parking standards for an industrial site like this?
I do not recall offhand. I'm happy to look it up while the applicant presents if that's something that interests you, but unfortunately I can't say without checking our EDO.
Well, again, you don't need to. It's not related to the legitimacy of the case. It's just that's a huge amount of parking, and it just shocked me to see that. And I hope it's because they're expecting 600 employees or something. Maybe that's it. But that, again, not relevant. So let's move along. If there are no further board questions to the applicant, the applicant will now present your evidence and legal arguments in support of the request. I'll remind you that any evidence and argument must focus, of course, on the applicable standards. So, Mr. Marsh, welcome back.
Good afternoon again, Mr. Chair and members of the board. I'm Collier Marsh, 301 Fayetteville Street, on behalf of the applicant. I'm also with Parker Poe, the land use attorneys representing them. I'd like to start by asking that our application, presentation, case report, and supporting materials be accepted into the record.
Very good, thank you.
Okay. And so, as Keegan mentioned, this request is for a variance from the section 7.1.9.b1 requirements that would otherwise require loading areas to be on the side or rear of a building, and we're requesting that loading area be permitted to be in the front of the building. By way of background, this site may look familiar to members of the board. Several variances were approved for a prior site plan in December of 2019 and then July of 2020, but a new tenant resulted in plan changes that required us to go back through the request process for the new plan. Notably, design alternates for some of the street locations and related, I guess, connections that you'll see on these site plans were just approved by the Appearance Commission last month. Like the Board of Adjustment found with the variance requests for the prior site plan, and like the Appearance Commission just found for the recent design alternates, this requested variance is justified under the UDO standards, and we're going to present evidence on each of those standards. If you could turn to the next slide, please. So again, just orienting us, this is the site. It's 28 acres across 10 parcels highlighted there in yellow on your screen. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the proposed site plan that Keegan had pulled up a moment ago. And the plan as shown will require relief from the loading area location requirements of UDO 7.1.9B1. so that we can locate that loading area in what's considered the front of the building under the code. But to walk through this request, I'd like to call Corey Howell. Mr. Howell, could you please state your name, address, education, and experience for the board?
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Corey Howell. I'm a licensed professional engineer with Kimley Horn Associates. My address is 421 Fayetteville Street, Suite 600, Raleigh 27601. I've been working in the field of land development engineering and design for over 15 years and designed facilities very similar to this during that time.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to tender Mr. Howell as an expert in civil engineering and site design. Okay, so Mr. Howell, have you reviewed the proposed site plan for its compliance with the requirements of the requested variance?
Yes, my firm designed the plans and I have reviewed them.
Okay, and can you please explain the site layout and the reasoning behind the variance request?
Yes, I will. Happy to. So I'm going to walk through just some of the nature of the different parking areas on the site, and just to help to explain why the loading area needs to be on the north side of the site where it was been shown and referred to here. So a little bit more about the different areas of the site. So all of the parking areas on the east and the south part of the building are for employee or visitor parking. All of the parking areas on the west side of the building are all for fleet vehicle storage and loading. And then the area to the north that we're referring to is the loading area where goods and other items would be delivered to the facility. And as was noted at the beginning, the layout of the site is very dependent upon the internal workings of the building, and needing to get pushing the delivery of the loading area to a different portion of the site would not allow us to provide the same amount of fleet vehicle parking and employee parking that we need in order to serve the facility and provide adequate parking and for employees and also for fleet vehicles for the facility. A little bit more as well, the proposed project extends and connects Bullock Farm Road to Freedom Drive from where it currently ends at Parton Road to the west. And so all of the roadway shown along the north side of the project is being constructed by the applicant. This Bullock Farm extension was required by the city as a means to reduce the existing block perimeter, and then also as a requirement of the Raleigh Street Plan. Dedication of this right-of-way and construction of the road will utilize approximately 1.9 acres of developable area of the site. With the creation of Bullock Farm Road, the extension across the northern part of the site, that ends up reducing the space between our existing northern property line and the southern property line, and then reduces the areas where we could potentially locate the truck court and the loading area. And as I mentioned earlier, the truck court and loading area could not be pushed to the rear of the building, because if we were to do that, we would then have to provide larger and wider access drives around each side of the building, and that would reduce the allowable employee parking and fleet vehicle parking, which would then make it unfeasible for the proposed use. As I mentioned, I think as Collier mentioned earlier too, this site is proposed for a specific user, specific end user, and so the inner workings of the building, the operations of the site have all been factored into this, and we've looked at this in many different ways in order to figure out an alternate means to do it. But this was determined to be the best means to meet all the objectives of the site and meet the goals of the city of Raleigh as well.
Can we turn to the next slide?
Thank you, Collier.
All right, and Corey, can you please explain the features of the site plan that would mitigate the impacts of the proposed loading area location?
Yeah, as you all can see here, and one thing I want to note too, there was some question at the beginning as to appearance, and so these proposed measures that we see here were approved by the Appearance Commission as means of screening for this previously, but because of the nature of the loading, and that needed to be approved by this board. So we're now coming to this board for approval. But the, as was mentioned, the C2 buffer yard is provided along the entire north side. That's a code requirement. In addition to that, and to go above and beyond the code requirement, we're also proposing the C3 yard be installed along all of the screen walls that surround the loading dock to help further buffer and provide some depth, and additional layering of landscape plant material to screen that area. We are also proposing a 10-foot screen wall around the loading area, which is 2 feet taller than the code required 8-foot wall. And lastly, a corrugated metal roll gate will be provided to screen the entry area when trucks are not in use, for trucks coming and entering and exiting the site.
All right, thank you, Corey. I'd like to quickly summarize the evidence, and then we can make our witnesses available to the board for questions. If you could turn to the next slide, please. So looking at the variance factors, unnecessary hardship would result here if strict application of the ordinance was required, because compliance with the loading area requirements would greatly reduce the efficiency of the proposed logistical operations at this site. Essentially, by moving the loading area to either the side or rear, it would result in a loss in parking and fleet vehicle storage below what's required for this use, and would make this an inappropriate site for this project. The second factor, hardship, results from conditions peculiar to the property. Here, the hardship results from the site's size, shape, and location in relation to the proposed Bullock Farm extension. And recall that Bullock Farm Road extension is included to enhance the existing street network by extending and connecting Bullock Farm Road to Freedom Drive and creating a new block, reducing block perimeter. However, the location of the extension results in diminished space between the extension and the property line. As a result, the truck court and loading area cannot be located in the rear or back of the building without those losses in needed space for other parts of this operation. The hardship did not result from actions taken by the applicant or the property owner. The Bullock Farm Road extension is included to enhance the existing street network and to better meet the UDO requirements for connectivity and for block perimeter. Furthermore, the proposed operation and use of the site is a modern, heavy logistical use that frankly wasn't considered when the UDO was adopted. And so each element of the proposed site is directly correlated and integrated with elements interior to the building that are necessary for the operation of the facility. Last, the requested variance is consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of the ordinance. First of all, it's consistent because the applicant is proposing to mitigate any potential impacts from the variance through enhanced screening, and enhanced screening that has been approved by the Appearance Commission. There's a 10-foot screening wall that's beyond the otherwise required height limits, C2 and C3 street yards, and then a pre-finished corrugated metal roll gate will also provide additional screening at that part of the site. The request is also consistent because it's part of a broader plan that enhances the street network through the Bullock Farm extension. And then finally, it's consistent with the purpose of variances because variances are often meant to remedy situations that were not contemplated when the UDO was adopted. And here, this proposed use is a very new, a modern logistical use that just wasn't contemplated when the UDO was adopted. So we believe a variance is the appropriate relief here. That concludes our presentation. We are happy to answer any questions that the board may have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Marsh. Any questions for Mr. Marsh or Mr. Howell? Okay, no one else signed up to speak in support or opposition. So we can wrap up by giving Ms. McDonald, anything from you?
No, not at this time.
Okay, Mr. Marsh, anything further?
Nothing further, thank you.
Okay, then let's close the evidentiary hearing and move to our deliberations. Again, it's a variance. I would like to move approval of the case.
I'll second.
Ms. Rudisill, thank you for your second. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? We'll go to a roll call vote then.
I'll say one thing, going by the aesthetics, I don't have a problem with the loading docks, where they are. I mean, I know a lot of times we talk about aesthetics, but in fact, I'd rather know what's there and to see what's there and see the activity than have it boarded off and shielded from the general public, which I know as a board member here, kind of flies in the face of some of the stuff that we're supposed to rule on, but I just want to let that be known. I think it's good to see in some of these facilities.
Okay, well, thank you for your comment. Any other comments? Okay, then let us move to our roll call vote.
Thank you. Chairman Swink?
Approve?
Ms. Rudisill?
Approve.
Thank you, Mr. Mile. Mr. Mile, you're muted. Raise your hand if you approve, Mr. Mile. Thank you. Mr. Coons?
Approve.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. And Mr. Sutton?
Approve.
Thank you. The next slide.
Okay, thank you very much. Let us move along to evidentiary hearing number 5. This is 1400 Ravenhurst Drive. Brenda Weeks is the property owner. It's a variance. BOA 0065-2020. So let's see, Ms. Weeks, if you would, for the record, please state your name and give us your address, and I will reaffirm your oath.
Hello and good afternoon. My name is Brenda Weeks. My property address is 1400 Ravenhurst Drive, Raleigh, North Carolina, 27615. I did note that the case report has an incorrect property address in the heading, but it does show the correct property address at the bottom of the page.
Okay, thank you for that. We'll be sure to double check that. Thanks for pointing that out. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much. Okay, Mr. Hodge. Mr. Hodge, we're not hearing you. I believe you may be muted.
There we go. I couldn't unmute for some reason. My apologies.
Okay. No problem.
Are you seeing the screen?
Yes.
I need to be sworn in.
Oh, I apologize. You do. Getting ahead of myself. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you so much, and thank you for that important reminder.
Oh, you're welcome. No problem. So the property owner has requested a 6.5-foot variance to the side yard setback requirements set forth in section 2.2.1 of the Unified Development Ordinance in order to replace an existing attached carport with a 3.5-foot side yard setback in conjunction with a replacement carport on the side of an existing detached house, which is located on a 0.31 acre property zone R4 and is located at 1400 Ravenhurst Drive. They're seeking to replace an existing carport that's had some deterioration issues, basically in the same location as what was there previously. But when they demolish the non-compliant carport, the code expects the replacement structure to be compliant. The property being zoned R4 would call for a 10-foot side yard setback, and the replacement structure is proposed to be as close as 3.5 feet from that side yard setback. Excuse me, from the side property line. I would note that the applicant's application in terms of the 4 variance standards essentially just respond in the affirmative. So I would ask that the applicant provide additional details and evidence during their presentation as to speaking to those standards rather than just a regurgitation and essentially a yes statement for the record as you evaluate this case. This is an aerial showing the property. The attached carport is on the left side as you're looking at this screen of the home. Here's a better image showing the property. So it's on the west side of the lot adjacent to the McSwain property. You can see where the concrete drive comes up, and then at the back end of the driveway is the location of the existing and proposed carport replacement. Here's an image of the existing structure that the applicant is seeking to replace, given the extensive repairs that would have been needed to maintain it in this existing location. Unless that you have any questions of staff at this time, that would conclude my presentation.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hodge. Board members, any questions for Eric?
Yeah, Eric, this is John, have they presented, the size of the replacement, the dimensions of that? Is it going to exceed what's already there, or is approximately the same size, or what does that look like?
I believe it's approximately the same size. I'll let Ms. Weeks confirm that, but I believe it to be essentially a like-for-like replacement.
Okay.
Other questions? Okay, Ms. Weeks, you can proceed with your presentation, but I would remind you to present evidence and legal arguments that support your request. And any evidence and argument must focus specifically on the applicable standards. And also any application or exhibit materials that you provided ahead of time, for the record, if you would ask that they be submitted today as part of this record.
Yes, thank you. Again, this is Brenda Weeks. I do request that all documentation supporting my request for Board of Adjustment hearing be entered into the record.
Okay.
I'd like to say that this is a variance request for 6.5 feet. Unnecessary hardship would result from the strict application of the ordinance, which, as Eric has stated, requires a 10-foot setback on the sidelines in the R4. It is, in fact, the carport side, the side of that lot is, in fact, adjacent to the McSwain's property. And I purchased this house. It was an existing structure, and the hardship resulted from the existing structure, which I was not aware until July that it was not in accordance with the setbacks. I had a survey done, and that was submitted to be part of the record. And you can see by the drawing on the survey that the carport is 20.5 feet wide and is approximately 3.5 feet from the boundary line. So the hardship, resulted from those conditions, and that is, what is peculiar to the property, not from any actions that were taken by me as the property owner. I am requesting the 6.5 feet in order to replace the carport with one of the same width. And there won't be any degradation. In fact, there would be improved airflow because the carport will be flat and not sloping downward, and there will be improved stormwater drainage as well. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, board members, do you have any questions for Ms. Weeks? Okay, I'm not hearing anyone. No one else signed up in support or opposition to this request. Ms. Weeks, anything further you would add for us?
No, it's just, again, would like to put a safe carport and that would improve airflow and light and stormwater drain-off.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hodge, anything further from you?
No, sir.
Then we'll just close the evidentiary hearing and move to our deliberations. This is a variance.
I make a motion to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Koontz. We have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Mile, thank you for your second. Any further discussion? Then let's move to our roll call vote.
Thank you, Mr. Cook.
Approve.
Thank you, Mr. Mile.
Approve.
Thank you, Chairman Swink.
Approve.
Thank you, Ms. Rudisill.
Approve.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton.
Approve.
Thank you. That makes 5.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Weeks. Let's move along to our evidentiary hearing number 6. This is 4113 Pearl Road, Sunnage Properties LLC, property owner. It's another variance, BOA 0067-2020. And as regards our participants, Francis Anaquensi, if you would please state your name for the record and your address.
Francis Anaquensi, 321 Hedrick Drive, Henderson, North Carolina.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hodge.
All right, this is a request for a 19-foot variance from the minimum width requirements for a cottage court as set forth in section 2.6.1.D2 of the Unified Development Ordinance. The standard width for the R4 zoning district would be 140 feet. The applicants are requesting that be reduced down to 121 feet for this property, which is 1.35 acres, zoned residential 4 and located at 4113 Pearl Road. So as you can see, the property is zoned R4. So there are some other properties in the vicinity zoned R10 and R6. Prior to amendments to the code, within the last year or so, R4 did not allow for cottage courts, so they are a new introduction to the code. Here's the site, an aerial showing that the site's predominantly wooded and undeveloped at this point. Here is a proposed layout that was not included with the original application when staff prepared the site plan. When staff prepared the staff report and provided responses to the 4 variance considerations. So I would go into a little more detail with this exhibit for today's presentation. As it relates to the first variance standard, where it notes unnecessary hardship would result from the strict application of the ordinance. The applicant has noted that the existing lot only has 121 foot of frontage along Pearl Road, but does expand toward the rear of the lot, ultimately reaching 171 feet in width. Other than the street frontage, minimum lot width required for the cottage court, they've noted that the site does meet all of the other dimensional requirements for the cottage court housing pattern as far as lot applicability goes. And staff really has no comment on that, other than to note that the 140 feet that's in the code was derived for the R4 district as a new addition to the code when this was added to that zoning district as an allowed housing type. Assumed that there would be two buildings out at the street with a common internal courtyard between them, as well as potentially a driveway coming off the primary street. So that's how the math kind of was arrived at with that 140 foot minimum standard. As you see in this late addition to their application, they don't have a double loaded courtyard as part of their proposal. So that's perhaps how they were able to consider this site for a cottage court. For the second standard for variances, the hardship results from conditions that are peculiar to the property, such as location, size, or topography. Again, they've noted that the lot is 121 feet wide at the street, and that is a pre-existing condition, which sort of piggybacks on standard 3 as far as their response that they did not take actions to result in this being a hardship for this particular lot. They purchased the lot. It's been in existence since 1982, 37 years before they purchased the property, and more than 3 decades before the dimensional standards for cottage courts set out in the current UDO were established. I would note that they are proposing a cottage court, on a lot. Not all lots in town or in the city are applicable for cottage courts. That's why we have minimum width, dimension, depth, et cetera, requirements. So as to determine which lots may or may not be suitable. So not every lot, just because it predates the code, is necessarily eligible for this housing pattern choice. The last standard is that the requested variance is consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of the ordinance, such that public safety is secured and substantial justice is achieved. The applicant has noted that the requested variance is consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of the ordinance. It will permit the development of a smaller, more affordable cottage court, home type on the lot, thereby providing much needed missing middle housing for the city's residents. As noted above, permitting a cottage court development with 121 foot of frontage on Pearl Road will be consistent with the R6 and R10 zoning of the many surrounding properties. In R6 and R10 districts, cottage court developments may be built on lots with 120 feet or less of street frontage. Just from staff's perspective, again, that 120 foot street frontage that's applicable to the higher density zoning districts was derived, again, based on smaller lot patterns of surrounding developments outside of a cottage court, such that a cottage court that was nested within, say, a streetscape or block of other R6 or R10 homes would have a similar kind of feel as it related to the street in terms of based on the width of the lot and the number of units along that segment of the roadway as compared to adjacent properties, given similar side yard setbacks, et cetera. So I would ask that the board, when evaluating this request, look at the spirit, purpose, and intent, particularly as it relates to cottage court developments themselves. I'll read to you the amended definition, which was amended through TC 418. That's the text change that was introduced in 2018. That defines a cottage court as a court. A cottage court is a group of small detached houses, attached houses, or townhomes, a 2-unit maximum per building, centered around a common courtyard. The central courtyard enhances the character of the area through the provision of consolidated open space. A cottage court may be developed on individual lots or with a common form of ownership. And then there are other standards within the ordinance that refer to dimensional requirements that are applicable to what is referred to as an internal courtyard. So I would just ask that the board evaluate that when considering this request as to whether they believe this meets the spirit and purpose and intent of a cottage court development type. With that, that would conclude my presentation, unless you have any other questions of me at this time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hodge. Board members, any questions?
Hey, Eric, John here. So that 121, I mean, we're talking about street, not street width, but
the width of the lot out at the street.
Out the street, but not the internal. Okay.
Correct. This lot is 19 feet shy of that 140 width.
On the street.
And at the street. And again, the code, I believe, contemplates when we were setting out those minimum widths that there would be 2 units flanking a central courtyard that went interior to the site. And then there would be other units ringed around the side and rear of the court, but that the court must front at the street. It's kind of a semantics as far as how one might evaluate what centered around a common court means in this instance. These units all do back up to a common court, but I would just note that part of the definition, uses this term centered around.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of thinking, like.
And that's kind of indirectly how those minimum lot widths were derived, with an assumption, I believe, that they were going to flank both sides of a court, not just be one, essentially a row of units with a strip of open space at their rear.
So it really goes back to the definition of what you think a court is, or like a.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. This plan was not evaluated by zoning staff who does plan review. Again, this is just a preliminary plan that they submitted, for exhibits associated with today's hearing.
Yeah.
So
Eric, go ahead.
No, please, after you.
So Eric, going back to your comment with John there, so do you think staff needs to take this back in review before you make your final decision on it?
That would definitely be something, that they have not sought relief from any other requirement other than the minimum lot width.
Okay. So, and also,
and plans that come to the board are not evaluated fully for code compliance unless they submit a plan in advance for plan review staff to evaluate. And I don't believe that has been the case here. The applicant can confirm or deny that, but I don't believe that's the case. So we who work with the Board of Adjustment we don't do full on plan review, as part of a variance application.
Okay. And I guess also back to the TC 4-18. So in your comments with John, the definition is sort of not as clear as you'd like for it to be here as far as being defined as what that common area is.
We have not had a lot of experience with cottage court developments prior to some of these recent text changes, including this one. We only ever reviewed and approved one in the city since they were authorized through the original UDO back in 2013. So we've made changes to the code to make them more appealing for folks to develop and easier in theory to develop. But we haven't completely made it the same standard as other types of development. They still have minimum expectations. And so I was just trying to clarify why R4 has a 140-foot width, whereas R6 and R10, which the applicant has spoken to with their responses to the standards, note that, that there's a different standard. But the reason that standard is different, in my opinion, as a staff person, is because we expect the size of a home and the associated side yards in an R6 or an R10 outside of a cottage court to be allowed on a narrower lot out at the street. So the same we would expect for a cottage court. That's how those numbers were derived for a smaller development within those higher density districts, with the expectation that you might have smaller homes and or smaller side yards for those street flanking units to have some consistency with properties in the neighborhood that are not part of a cottage court.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Other questions? Yeah, this one's curious to me. I want to hear from the applicant before go any further. And I may come back with some questions later. But if there are no more board questions for Mr. Hodge, we can move to the applicant, and the applicant will present evidence and legal arguments in support of the request. Again, remind you that any evidence and argument must focus on the applicable standards. I believe, and excuse me if I mispronounce your name, Ms. Coretta Amos is the attorney representing the applicant.
Correct. That is Coretta Amos. I am located at 150 Fayetteville Street, Raleigh, North Carolina, Raleigh, North Carolina, and I'm with Smith Anderson, the law firm there, and I am representing the applicant in this matter. I do first want to move that the application as in presentation and all the corresponding documentation be submitted into evidence. Before I hop into our presentation, I do want to confirm what Mr. Hodge stated earlier. The conceptual design was just submitted in support of this presentation. We have not submitted a definitive plan or anything like that for any type of review. So I did want to do that, but we did, in coming before you guys, want to kind of give you even if it's a rough draft sketch of what parties are thinking of trying to do with this unit. So just to jump into the presentation, this is a variance request. The variance is for a 19-foot difference from the 140-foot site width. That is along Pearl Road. This is an aerial exhibit of the parcel currently. And as mentioned, the site width is smaller along Pearl Road and does increase as it goes further into the property. Next slide, please. As mentioned, the current zoning for this property is residential 4. There are surrounding parcels that are in the R6, R10, as well as some R4s as well. Next slide, please. This is a conceptual design of what the applicant proposes to put on this property. I will go through the items for review of factors for this parcel. We do believe that strict compliance application for this ordinance will result in an unnecessary hardship. Could you please go to the next slide? This is because the existing lot has a 121-foot frontage along Pearl Road. As mentioned earlier, it does expand towards the rear, going to about 171 in width. This property is about 1.35 acres. Other than the width at the street, this parcel does meet all of the other lot dimension requirements for a cottage court housing pattern. As Mr. Hodge mentioned, the City Council did amend the UDO to permit cottage court housing patterns on property zone R4, which includes this property. And in doing so, council found that the housing pattern would permitting this housing pattern would help supplement the missing middle or affordable housing. And that is what we're trying to do with this request. We believe that not allowing or preventing the development of the cottage court housing because of the frontage being less than the 140 would severely limit the owner's ability to develop the property. The property has sufficient area depth and width to accommodate the pattern. And so that is why we're before you. As a result, as we move forward to the second item, the hardship results from conditions that are particular to the property. We do believe that the existing lot width, this is a pre-existing issue due to the current boundary lines of the property that has been in existence before this applicant even purchased the property, which feeds into the third factor, as this hardship did not result from the actions taken by the applicant or the property owner. As Mr. Hodge mentioned, based on what we submitted with the application, the deeds going back as far as 1982 had the same lot configuration. And so this is not due to anything on the property owner. We do contend that this requested variance is consistent with the spirit and purpose and the intent of the ordinance. We believe that the more affordable cottage court homes on the lot would again provide much needed affordable housing, as well as missing middle housing for city residents in this area. And we believe that it will be in line with what the public would want, or that is our contention. And that concludes our presentation this afternoon. I am available, as well as Mr. Francis, for any questions from the board at this time.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Amos. Board members have any questions? Okay, there are no additional participants speaking in support or in opposition. So I'm going to give the board one more chance here. And I have a question or two for Mr. Hodge, if I may. So to understand, there are still other layers of review to come towards this particular proposal. If we were to approve today, what we would simply be approving is a variance on the frontage.
The minimum lot width or site width to allow for this site to be developed as a cottage court. That is correct. That they have not sought relief from any other standard or code regulation associated with the cottage court development on this site.
And they would submit a plan that would be subject to staff review.
That's correct. And that's the case with all projects that come before the board.
Right.
Code compliance, unless relief is sought through this board or through some other channel, is expected, right on up through the review. So if they didn't get staff comments on various aspects of the code and move forward with this request, yes, potentially any project could come back, as you've seen with other cases, when they've submitted, early in the process, maybe even before submitting for plan review to the board, because they knew they were falling short on a certain standard or two, that as the project progresses through a more intensive plan review by all the various departments, that sometimes projects do come back for a second or third, unfortunately, request for additional relief for things that were not contemplated by the applicants at the front end.
Okay.
I would also note that, another solution, as is the case in many times, would be a rezoning application. That's a different process. It's a legislative decision. But that is one way by right in which an applicant, if they were successful in rezoning to R10 or R6 as surrounding properties are similarly zoned, that the standard would drop from 140 feet to 120 feet, which is consistent with what the applicant's lot width currently is. So if they were to upzone their property by 2 units per acre, they would to R6, which is what the property behind this lot is zoned, they would, also have an opportunity to develop the cottage court by right through that zoning mechanism.
Okay, thank you. Board, other questions for the applicant or Ms. Hodge? Okay, Ms. Amos, anything further from you?
No, not at this time.
Okay, I got ahead of myself. I think that I indicated there were no other applicants, other speakers in support or opposition. I want to be clear, even though I'm being redundant, that that's in there. So let's close the evidentiary hearing and move to our board deliberations. And I want to begin by saying I'm not particularly happy with this particular rendering, although I understand it's not a plan. I think the cottage court is such an important potential tool for the very reasons the applicant has mentioned, missing middle housing and other things. And I would be excited to see a really good plan presented, but that does not necessarily change the variance. I'm trusting that further review will help them shape a good product. So the question before us really is about the frontage, the 19-foot variance. So
if staff could add one comment, as we're working on other changes this year to missing middle housing, there is talk of allowing townhomes by right in the R4 zoning district. I can't say specifically what those standards would look like, but they would not require a central courtyard, and theoretically you could have a private drive so long as all units are within 300 feet of the public street, serving a small single file townhome development of this sort, potentially under those new regulations moving forward. Not to say you should or shouldn't base your decision on that, but just particularly for your benefit, Mr. Swing, and your support of missing middle housing, just wanted to let you know that this potentially has possibility under another avenue through townhome development moving forward as we broaden the scope of where townhomes can be developed citywide. So we are looking to add them to R4 and potentially give some density benefits associated with that as well. So just wanted to let that be known.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Richardson, just to keep me straight, we've heard his comments. We've closed the evidentiary hearing. Are we okay? Should I do something different regarding what he just told us?
So I think it would have been preferable to reopen the evidentiary hearing prior to him speaking. So if you want to go ahead and do that and just have Eric state that, what he said should have been presented as evidence or should be taken as evidence.
Thank you. I felt like that was the case. I just wanted your affirmation. So thank you. So if we can, I would ask the board if you will reconsider reopening the evidentiary hearing so we can accept Mr. Hodges' comments. And Mr. Puccini, do we need to do that as an official vote?
Before we proceed, I don't know that it was really evidence in this hearing. It was just more for your education about what we were working on in missing middle. As an aside, it has no specific really bearing on their hardship case or their request today. I just wanted to let you know that, as far as I know, you're a big proponent of missing middle, and to let you know that staff is working on other things out there that would support a plan of this sort, were that to be the applicant's preferred approach in the event that they had trouble getting a site plan approved by staff as a cottage court. That's all.
Okay.
But I'm happy to put it in as evidence if that's the preference of the attorney's office and the board. But it was more kind of a sidebar, just update.
That would be my thought too, more of an advisory or for additional edification.
So to answer your question, Chairman, if Jamie would confirm this, a vote would not be needed. The opening and closing a hearing is up to your discretion.
And Mr. Swink, if you want to just ask if Ms. Amos objects to that have been being presented outside of the evidentiary hearing too.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you. That makes sense. Ms. Amos, you've heard what we've said. Do you have any objection to us just accepting that as a sidebar comment?
That is fine. No objections to that.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And Ms. Hodge, I do appreciate your helping me understand that. I am interested in the subject, and I do understand your point. So thank you for making that. So we are back to the question of board deliberations. This is a variant, and we're looking at the frontage question. So I'll certainly entertain comments and/or a motion.
Even though there was a lot of discussion that occurred on this case, I would go ahead and make a motion to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Mile. And I will go ahead and offer a second because I think that my concerns have been noted, that there'll be opportunities to flesh this out further, and hopefully an excellent project will be produced. It's an important thing to do, and maybe this variance will help move that along. So we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Then let's move to our roll call vote, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mile.
Approve.
Thank you, Chairman Swink.
Approve.
Thank you, Mr. Kuntz. Mr. Kuntz.
Approve, sorry.
Thank you. Ms. Rudisil.
Approve.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton.
Approved.
Thank you. That makes 3. 5, sorry.
Great. Thank you so much. Good discussion on this. Thank you. Now, we've got one more hearing. I'd like to plow through unless someone feels there's a need for a break, a refreshment break. Speak up. If not, let us move along then to evidentiary hearing 7. 2213 Sanderford Road, Jeffrey Stelmack, property owner. It's a variance BOA 0068-2020. So let's see, Mr. Stelmack, and correct your name for me, please. If you'd state your name for the record and give me your address, and we'll reaffirm your oath.
Jeffrey Stelmack, 2213 Sanderford Road in Raleigh.
Okay, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you very much. Okay, Mr. Hodge.
So the applicants are seeking a variance request of 12 feet to the rear yard setback requirements set forth in section 2.2.1 of the Unified Development Ordinance in order to construct an addition to the rear of the existing home that would result in an 18-foot setback along the eastern property line on this 0.27 acre property, which is zoned residential 4 and located at 2213 Sanderford Road. And my PowerPoint seems to be frozen. There we go. Here's an aerial. The property takes its address and technically at the time of development fronted on Sanderford Road. If this property were to come in today for development, we would probably see a project where the home was oriented toward Foxtrot Road, given the nature of the different roadways. Typically, we see people orient their home on the narrower portion of a rectangular lot toward that street, versus the wider street yard, which in this case is also a busier road, Sanderford. But because at the time of the development, they were allowed to choose which street to orient to, we essentially carry on with those established orientation purposes for the purpose of front yard setback, side yard, rear yard setback determinations on lots that were previously developed, as was this one. So as a result, they have their front yard and rear yard setback measurements taken against the narrower depth of the lot. So as you can see there on the left, the lot is essentially at its deepest from Sanderford, 105 feet, whereas the depth of the lot off of Foxtrot is somewhere over 130 feet. So side yard setbacks in the R4 added together only total 20 feet. That's taken out of play in terms of area that can be built upon. But because of the orientation of this lot, we've applied the front and rear depths, which in this case add up to 50 feet, the 20-foot front yard and 30-foot rear yard. We've taken 50 feet of the depth of the narrowest orientation of the lot out of play. And so essentially the existing home, the corner there at the top right, is right at the setback line. And so they're seeking to expand the home essentially in the location of the existing rear deck, which on this image is shown in red. And so therefore building into the 30-foot rear yard setback. As the applicant has noted in their response comments, were this oriented toward Foxtrot, they could theoretically build within 10 feet of that neighboring property. But because the home's orientation was pre-established many, many years ago toward Sanderford, we continue to apply those standards toward that. I would note that the existing home, if it were to be considered oriented toward Foxtrot for the purposes of setback and expansion purposes, I would note that the leftmost portion of the property, that home is shy of the 30-foot setback in that area, if that's what we were to determine as the rear yard. And so again, that's another factor as to why we've kind of settled on Sanderford Road, continuing to be treated, as it were, at the time of construction as the primary setback. We don't let corner lots necessarily pick and choose for purposes of expansion versus existing structures and whether or not they're considered non-conforming or not. We don't let them play switcheroo, if you will, at the time they go into expand for these corner lot situations. So that's why the city's firmed up on Sanderford being the road and the 30-foot rear yard setback being applicable there too. We would note that there is side yard area on both sides of the home in which a theoretical expansion could occur. I realize it may have structural and mechanical, electrical impacts. I'll let the applicants speak to those concerns. The other variance considerations, really, I think for the most part, the applicant has made a case, sort of centered their case on how the lot was developed in this primary street determination, Sanderford versus Foxtrot. Staff would also note that there is a slight skewing between the rear of the rear facade of the home and that rear property line. They are not square or parallel with one another, so staff would recognize that. Here's a image of the area of the deck as viewed from the rear yard, showing the approximate location of the proposed expansion, and a closer aerial noting where that would be, again, 18 feet from the rear property line instead of the requisite 30. And here it is as viewed from the side street, Foxtrot Road, looking into the lot from the street side of the property, or excuse me, side street of the property. So unless you have any questions of me at this time, that would conclude staff's presentation.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hodge, questions from the board? Okay, let us move on to the applicant. The applicant will now present evidence and legal arguments in support of the request. Any evidence and argument must focus on the applicable standards. So Jim Eatman, welcome.
Hi, thank you. I'd like to begin by asking that our presentation and the supporting materials be admitted into the record at this time.
Thank you. If you could give us your address.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. 4130 Park Lake Avenue. That's Raleigh, NC 27612.
Okay.
Again, my name is Jim Eatman. I'm with the law firm of Lynch and Eatman here in Raleigh, and I'm here on behalf of the property owners of 2213 Sanderford Road, Jeffrey and his wife Megan Stelmack. Mr. Stelmack is present with us at the hearing today in case the board has any questions for him. And Eric, if you could go ahead and go to slide 2, please, of my presentation.
Not sure which one is first or second.
Well, this looks like your presentation.
They're essentially one and the same. They've kind of gotten all merged into the same presentation, but I think they're in the same order as you submitted. Is it the site plan you want or the pictures?
The site plan is fine. At some point, I will need to see the our specific presentation that we submitted.
Let me keep going. I thought this was all that was in your packet. I apologize if I didn't get the slides.
One or two pictures that I don't believe are included in this PowerPoint that were included in ours. If it's burdensome to pull that up, I think we can probably make do with these.
It's hard for me to pull up stuff while these are being presented.
Understood. We'll roll with this one, and if you could go to that site plan, that would be perfect. All right. Well, as Eric just mentioned, we're here to request a 12-foot variance to the 30-foot rear lot line setback. What's going on here is a proposed expansion of the kitchen of the home. They want to add conditioned space in what is essentially the footprint of an existing outdoor deck. That deck extends 12 feet out from the house, and it's 15.5 feet wide. The proposed expansion would be 11.5 feet out from the house, so a little bit shorter, and it would be 19 feet wide. We'd be adding 4 feet on that side there, closest to Foxtrot Road, so that the expansion would align with the existing corner of the home. I would also point out, and I think Eric mentioned this, but the survey here, the site plan here shows the deck as 18.8 feet from the rear lot line. Since we have an angled rear lot line, the corner of the expansion closest to Foxtrot Road, which would be that upper right-hand corner of the red square, would actually be a few inches closer to the rear lot line than the point that was measured on the survey, that 18.8. So that's why we're requesting a 12-foot variance instead of 11-foot 2-inch variance. That way we can account for that slight difference in distance due to the angled rear lot line. Let's see, Eric, if you could go to maybe the slide facing the picture facing the home from Foxtrot Road. Yeah, perfect. A couple of things to point out here. You can see how far the deck extends, the existing deck extends. It's, plenty of space left in that rear of the home there in the yard. You can also see the existing roof line. This expansion is not going above the existing roof line. It'll be more or less where that that overhang is coming down over the existing deck. So that gives you kind of an idea of how high vertically this is going. In regard to the possibility of expanding this laterally towards Foxtrot Road, you can see here in this picture that existing brick facade. The Stelmax investigated, looked into, had a professional engineer advise them on the possibility of expanding laterally towards Foxtrot Road. That way they would not have to seek a variance. And they were advised that it would require extensive plumbing and electrical reconfiguration, including moving an electrical panel. It would also involve tearing down the existing brick facade. So while that would technically, I mean, it's possible, it would really be unduly burdensome based on the cost and the extent of the work that would be required. And it's just not economically feasible or really sensible for the Stelmax to incur that cost for such a small proposed expansion. And Eric, if you could go to the photo of the back of the home, facing the back. Perfect. This is actually a picture taken by Mr. Stelmack of the back of the home. You can see that offset there on the side. That's where we have that 4-foot lateral expansion. So the expansion will line up with the current side of the house. I would also note the white vinyl facade there. That's the same facade they're going to use on the expansion. So the appearance of the expansion will be consistent with the rest of the back of the home. And then I would also note, you can see what I believe is an electrical panel there on the side of the house attached to that brick. And that, again, is just part of the reason why expanding to that side would be really a major undertaking that is not really feasible or reasonable. Let's see, and then I guess if you could go back to the that earlier photo, from Foxtrot Road. Okay, so the photo I had, the other photo that's not included showed a little bit more of the existing house, but just for, I can certainly describe it. The house on the backside of the Stelmax property, obviously you can't even see it here because it is far enough away, but it's not far outside of the picture. And it matches basically the facade of the Stelmax house. It's part brick, it's same design, general design, part vinyl. And again, you can't see it in this photo, but the neighbor's driveway is on the opposite side of their property from where this proposed expansion will be and from the Stelmax home. And there's no windows on the side of their home facing the Stelmax property. So in terms of impact on the neighbor, there's really very little to none. And I think presumably that's part of why there's no opposition here today. But I just wanted to give you guys a little more context here and help understand the proposed expansion. But I'll go ahead and move on to the specific requirements of the UDO here. First, that the strict application of the ordinance would cause an unnecessary hardship. There's several hardships here. One, this is a 1,600 square foot home, and the owners need the additional space. They need it to increase the utility home. This isn't the utility of the home, excuse me. This isn't just an unnecessary addition. I would also note that this was originally built in 1970. They need to update the home, and they'd like to add some value to the home, given that it's 50 years old. The second hardship is that strict application of the ordinance would require the Stelmax to expand laterally into Foxtrot Road. And I won't rehash all that, but again, based on the cost and the extent of the work, it's just not practical or feasible. for the Stelmax. And then the third hardship has to do with the fact that this expansion will essentially be in the footprint of an existing deck. Since they're not asking to go further into the setback than the location of that deck, and they're not going above the existing roof line, strict application would really put an undue burden on them for something that is really relatively a minor change from what already exists there. The second standard dealing with the hardship resulting from conditions peculiar to the property. Eric discussed the unusual orientation of this property and some of that already. But really, again, it is just the nature of the lot and how the home was built on the lot. It's a corner lot with an angled rear lot line. So not only do you deal with, had the home been oriented facing Foxtrot Road, you're also dealing with this. It's not an even lot line, rear lot line. It's an angled rear lot line. So it runs closer, right up to the house on one side of it, and then there's plenty of room on the other side. And that is certainly peculiar to this property. That's not something that exists with the neighbors or the neighborhood or the community at large. It's a unique factor here. In terms of the next standard, that the hardship did not result from actions taken by the property owner. The Stelmax purchased this home as is. If they had designed the home and built it this way, then it probably would not be reasonable to now request a variance. But it was built long before they bought it, and long before the UDO and the current setbacks came into effect. I'd also note that the Stelmax have not caused or created any other encroachments here. And again, there's, there are no alternatives. So this isn't just an arbitrary decision to go out the back of the house because they want to. It's something that's kind of out of their hands if they want to expand it. Lastly, the last standard that the request is consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of the ordinance. Presumably, the ordinance is intended for things like maintaining space and privacy and promoting uniformity in the neighborhood and, just general consistency with public health, safety, and welfare. All of those things are true with this request. It'll actually increase privacy between the neighbors by enclosing that outdoor deck with a conditioned space instead. It will, as I mentioned, not only be consistent with the appearance of the Stelmax residents, but also consistent with the appearance of their neighbors' homes as well and the rest of the neighborhood. And it's a very small, simple change. It doesn't pose any absolute environmental risks or any other, detriment to the public health, safety, or welfare. So now that I've addressed those, I'll just quickly conclude. Again, this is a request for a 12-foot variance to the 30-foot rear lot line setback, which would result in a new rear lot line setback of 18 feet. Our proposed expansion will not extend any further to the rear lot line in the existing deck, and it won't extend vertically above the existing roof line. And this is a necessary addition with no feasible alternatives for expansion. So unless there are any other questions at this time, that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Mr. Eatman, I would note, we've just located your PowerPoint. Apparently you emailed it to a colleague. So I do have, I believe it's in my inbox now, if you'd like me to try to pull that up to share any of the slides that you had.
I feel like I was able to describe it with what we had, and I apologize for the confusion there. Now that you mentioned that, I did send that to Keegan and not to you. So I apologize for that, and I feel like we've been able to adequately describe it. And as you noted, it is more or less the same as what you presented. So
okay,
I think we're fine unless the board has any questions that might help address.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Eatman. Board members, do you have questions for Mr. Eatman? Okay, no one else signed up to speak either in support or opposition to this case. So we'll go to the closing. Mr. Eatman, any last thoughts? Anything else you wish to add?
Not at this time, thank you.
Okay, likewise, Mr. Hodge, anything else from you?
No, sir, nothing at this time.
All right, and let us close the evidentiary hearing and move to our board deliberations. I'll entertain comments and/or a motion.
Motion to approve, John Coons.
Thank you, Mr. Coons. Motion to approve. Do I have a second? Was that Mr. Mile? Yes, thank you, sir. We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Then let us move to our roll call vote.
Thank you, Mr. Coons.
Approved.
Mr. Mile? Thank you. Chairman Swink?
Approved.
Thank you, Ms. Rudisill. Thank you, Mr. Sutton.
Approved.
Thank you. That makes 5.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Eatman. Thank you, Mr. Stelmack. Let us now move to our final business of the day, approval of the minutes from our December 14th, 2020 meeting. They were attached as part of the agenda. We have a motion to approve. Motion to approve. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Sutton. We have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
A second.
Ms. Rudisill, thank you. We have a motion to approve and a second. Let us roll call vote, please.
Yes, sir. Mr. Sutton?
Approve.
Ms. Rudisill?
Approve.
Chairman Swink?
Approve.
Mr. Mile?
Approve.
Mr. Coons?
Approve.
Done. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Ms. Richardson, anything for us today?
I have nothing for you today. I think you handled the one item, which was Catherine having her baby on, I believe, was the 2nd or the 3rd. So
Yeah, that's great news.
So I'll be here for the next few months.
Good start to the new year for her and her family.
Yes, it is.
Okay, any other business from anyone? Okay, thank you. It's a good meeting, good pace today, and hopefully we can move them all this quickly. So Happy New Year, everyone, and we'll see you in a month. Happy New Year, everybody.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Stay safe.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye.